think John's given us a very good way forward, and I thank you very much for that. I also now like to welcome Father Dan Ryan. Father Dan was born in Mitchell, Queensland. We're getting a lot of people coming from the western part of Queensland, which is great. Last night we had, I think, 4 on the stage, and they were all from Western Queensland. He's the youngest of 7 children. His father, Leo, was a knight, and he died in 1979. Father's brother, John, is still a knight. Family moved to Brisbane in 1952 and lived at Hurston, Wooloowin. He went to the Mercy Sisters Primary School and secondary schools, St Clements and Albion. He went to the seminary. Blue, I'm finding a bit hard to read. He went to Banya Seminary. It was ordained in 1974. He was assistant priest at Cloundra Cathedral in Goodna, and then parish priest at Daisy Hill, Service Paradise and Sunnybank. He's now the vicar for clergy in the Archdiocese of Brisbane, looking after the clergy of the Archdiocese, which is a very big job and role. He likes to play golf when he can, so have a talk to Jason. He's our golf expert, and but he reckons only a few times in a year. He likes to ride a bike, but it's electric, so that's the type of bike I think I would like. And he hopes the Broncos can win more games this year than in the last 2 years. And I must admit that I'm giving up going to the Gabba tonight to watch the Lions being here. So I hope the Broncos do well for you, Father. And Father's paper is going to be on, is exactly right. Plenary Council update and listen to what the Spirit is saying. So please welcome Father Dan.
Everyone. Thank you for that introduction. I've been to the cemetery quite a few times. I hopped in a taxi one night and I said to the taxi driver, "Will you take us to Banyo Seminary?" Sure enough, he took us to the cemetery. Now, I've given you a couple of papers there. One's the Plenary Council prayer, which a lot of us would have already prayed a little bit, I think, over the years. But we pray this prayer together before I begin my talk. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. We pray together. Come, Holy Spirit of Pentecost. Come, Holy Spirit of grace our name. O God, bless and guide all your people in Australia, and guide us on the pilgrim way of the Plenary Council. Give us the grace to see your face in one another, and to recognise Jesus as our companion on the road. Give us the courage to tell our stories and speak boldly of your truth. Give us ears to listen humbly to each other, and a discerning heart to hear what you are saying. Lead your church into a hopeful future, that we may know the joy of the gospel. Through Jesus Christ our Lord, bread of the journey from age to age. Amen. Our Lady, help the Christians. Pray for us. And Mary McKillop. Pray for us. God bless us, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. I'm sure a lot of us have heard a lot about the Plenary Council, but I sort of suspect there's a lot of ignorance out there about the Plenary Council. That we've all heard that it's happening, but we've got no idea what's going on. And It all started, I think Archbishop Coleridge has spoken to the State Council a couple of years ago about the Plenary Council, but it all started back in 2016 where the Bishops of Australia decided they'd have a Plenary Council in Australia. And it was then ratified by the Pope Francis, that wonderful Pope of ours. And people say, what is a Plenary Council? And really, it's a gathering of bishops and other representatives representing all the dioceses and the eparchies, that's the Eastern churches in Australia. And its purpose is to discuss what is the Spirit calling us in Australia to at the moment. And the Plenary Council has authority to make church laws and to recommend through to Rome some changes. And even, I'll talk about it a little bit later, that the Plenary Council is even suggesting that some of the canon law will be changed for the church too. So the Plenary Council was to meet with 280 members back almost over 2 years ago. But COVID got in and scuttled good plans, and we were to again meet last year, 280 members, as I said. And now those 280 are made up of bishops, vicars. I'm a vicar. I should say what I am. I'm a vicar for clergy. You have the Archbishop, Bishop and vicars. And the vicars get to do all the work and the Archbishop always delegates the vicars. That's my story anyway. So I'm the vicar for clergy in Brisbane. I look after all the clergy. I try and help them in their formation and faith development and growth. In other dioceses and archdioceses, there's always a vicar general. He's the one who helps run the archdiocese or the diocese. And then you might have a vicar for ecumenism, a vicar for welfare, and it's just different ways different bishops run their diocese. So other members of the Plenary Council are religious leaders, religious provincials, theologians, seminary rectors and pariti. And so, as I said, 280. Now, because of COVID, we couldn't meet again last year, so we met online. In October last year, 280 of us started a whole week's journey on the first leg of the assembly. And it was to be held in Adelaide, but because of COVID, it was all online. And so every day we met, and the 280 was broken down into groups of 30. And that group of 30 would meet for several hours every day, trying to discern what the Spirit was saying. And one of the things that we were asked to do every day was to listen to each other. And that 30 was broken down to a group of 8. And that group of 8 would take on some of the agenda that you have there. I'll refer to the agenda in a moment. And we discussed that part of the agenda that we were given to discuss. But of the 8, everyone spoke. We started with quiet, praying that the Holy Spirit would guide us. And then we were asked, what was the Holy Spirit saying to you? And we shared that, each of us. And then we were asked, what did you hear the group saying? And then we shared it later on with the group of 30. And it was a really inspired way of discernment. And the Pope is really, really strong, and I'll mention this a few times, about listening, discernment, and Christ-centeredness. And if there's anything that the Plenary Council is working on, is being listening, because we had listening and dialogue back in 2018, 2019, where there were 70, how many? There were 8,000 submissions put into the Plenary Council from 220,000 people. So it was actually 18,000, not 7,000. So that's how it began. Some of you would have been involved in your own parishes, listening and discerning. And that was put through to the Plenary Council. So we've had our first our first assembly. The second and final assembly will be in July in Sydney, and hopefully we'll all be present face to face. We don't want to do online again, it's so hard. We went for a whole week. But it was really enlivening for me, because it reminded me a little bit when I was a child, listening to what was going on in Rome for the Vatican Council, and hearing these things are going to change, and a new way of doing church. And I think this is what the Plenary Council is offering Australia at the moment, is a new way of doing church. And we were all asked, what do you think God is asking of us in Australia at this time? What is God asking of us in Australia at this time? And that's the question that's ongoing. So I'd just like to refer to the agenda there. If you've got it there, I'll put it up on the screen as well. But on one side there's the egg-looking thing which I refer to. So the agenda is the children of God, disciples of Jesus Christ and guided by the Holy Spirit. The members of the 5th Plenary Council, we've had 4 before, you might not have known that, but the 5th Plenary Council of Australia are called to develop concrete proposals to create a more missionary, Christ-centred church in Australia at this time. And we were listening to Pope Francis. I dream of a missionary option, he says. That is a missionary impulse capable of transforming everything, so that the church's customs, ways of doing things, times and schedules, language and structures can be suitably channeled for the evangelisation of today's world rather than for her self-preservation, outward-looking rather than inward-looking. And I like to hear that vision that John was talking about, to be a strong, faith-filled Catholic fraternity committed to serving. And I think that's important, that we're outward-looking. So the agenda that you have there, if you flick it over, I'll just quickly go through it, and I'll put it up on the screen. There's 6 sections. The first is on conversion. How might we better accompany one another in the journey of personal and communal conversion which mission in Australia requires? So there's about 16 questions here, and these were the questions that we were considering in that first assembly back in October online. How might we heal the wounds of abuse, coming to see through the eyes of those who've been abused? How might the Church in Australia be open in new ways to Indigenous ways of being Christian in spirituality, theology, liturgy and missionary discipleship? How might we learn from the First Nations people? How might the Church in Australia meet the needs of the most vulnerable, go to the peripheries, be missionary in places that may be overlooked or left behind in contemporary Australia? How might we partner with others, Christians, peoples of other faiths, neighbourhood community groups, government, to do this? How might the Church in Australia respond to the call to ecological conversion? How can we express and promote a commitment to an integral ecology of life in all its dimensions, with particular attention to the more vulnerable people and environments in our country and region? We need to look at prayer. How might we become a more contemplative people, committing more deeply to prayer as a way of life, and celebrating the liturgy of the Church as an encounter with Christ, who sends us out to make disciples of all the nations? How might we better embrace the diverse liturgical traditions of the churches which make up the Catholic Church, and the cultural gifts of immigrant communities to enrich the spirituality and worship of the Church in Australia? We all need formation from birth to death. How might we better form leaders for mission? This is what John was talking about too, going out. Adults, children, families, couples and single people. How might we better equip ordained ministers to be enablers of missionary discipleship? The Church becoming a priestly people, served by the ordained ministry. How might formation, both pre and post-ordination, better foster the development of bishops, priests and deacons as enablers of the universal Christian vocation to holiness lived in missionary discipleship. We need to look at the structures. How might parishes better become local centres for the formation and animation of missionary disciples? How might the Church in Australia be better structured for mission, considering the parish, the diocese, religious orders, the PJPs and new communities? And the governance, we need to look at our governance. How might the people of God, lay and ordained, women and men, approach governance in the spirit of synodality and the co-responsibility for a more effective proclamation of the gospel? How might we recast governance at every level of the Church in Australia in a more missionary key? In our institutions, how might we better see the future of Catholic education, primary, secondary and tertiary, through a missionary lens? How might we better see the future of Catholic social services, agencies, health and aged care ministries as key missionary and evangelising agencies? Ooh, it bears you out, doesn't it? So that's what we were looking at. That was the agenda. And from that, I'll allow some time towards the end for some questions. And from that, we produced a document which is dated the 28th of February with a lot of proposals. Now, the 280 members who attend need to vote on these proposals. So I'd like to read you the 30 pages. I won't. But I've just got a little summary of some of the proposals that I was going to read more, but time's going very fast, because that's a huge agenda which we just mentioned there. We're looking at the whole of the church. We're looking at a church that needs to think about synodality, just not from the top down. We need to work together. And Pope Francis is very strong about synodality, that we're listening, dialogue and discernment process, that we listen, we talk, spend time in prayer and discern before we go forward. Structures and processes for listening, dialogue and discernment between all of the faithful are to be established as permanent ways of being church. It's the same for the knights. Dialogue, listening, discernment. It's a way of being church for the future. So some of the proposals I'll just share with you, so that that comes up in that document which was issued at the end. And this is not conclusive, and it doesn't include everything. It's a fairly quick skim. So we need to look at diocesan pastoral councils, which we had in the Archdiocese but hasn't functioned for quite a while. Every parish should have a parish pastoral council, and then across the board a national pastoral council. We need to look at the Eastern churches, the ancient patriarchal churches, and work with them and use the gifts that they have to share with the church. We need to look at parish renewal and ways of doing that. We need to set up places where people in parishes can be formed, where we can be formed as missionary disciples, not looking at ourselves but going out. And that's really important, to look after those who are married, look after, and this is a marriage catechumenate, that it goes through the whole of their marriage, that they're supported. You might remember when we used to have the pre-Cana and the Cana talks, and back in the old days. But we need to support marriage in our world. We need to support the single life. We need to go out to the peripheries. But I will find something on this if I can, that the peripheries are so important. We need to be caring. We need to be looking after people. And I think that's what's so important, that the... go out to the peripheries, within and beyond parishes. And this is a challenge for the Knights, to create opportunities for those who may be overlooked, including those who are widowed or orphaned, those with a disability, those who are divorced and remarried, those who feel they are not accepted because of their sexuality or gender identity, and all those who experience marginalisation. Real challenge. Outreach projects so that we work with other Christian churches, we work with the Muslims, we work with the Jews, that we reach out. There it goes again. We need to be a listening, synodal church. We need to listen, discern. We need to care for our women. This domestic violence that's going on in such a terrible way in our society needs to be rooted out of our society. There needs to be a tenderness in our society. Women to be treated with openness, respect, acceptance and tenderness. Formation for leadership from the bishop right down, be they priests, continue the formation, but in our parishes, formation of leadership. Lifelong formation for clergy. Again, those on the peripheries, we need to care for them. Catholic education needs to be Catholic and missionary and outgoing and transforming, just not an education, but a Catholic education. Support the human, spiritual, academic and pastoral accompaniment and formation of young people, women and leaders. Look at our Eucharist as the summit and the source of everything that we do. That the Eucharist is there to nourish us and strengthen us so that we're committed to go out and be missionary in our world, just not to be caring for ourselves. To enable people to participate fully, consciously and actively in the liturgy, the summit and the source of the Christian life. Maybe reintroduce the third rite of reconciliation. We'll petition Rome for that. Look at our common home, Laudate Si. And Pope Francis is very, very strong in looking after our environment. A ministry of preaching. Those who sit in the pews need rewarding for listening to us priests sometimes, year after year after year. But to have more training, not only for priests, but for lay people. And this is what I was saying, that the canon law may need to be changed. We'll recommend the canon law be changed so that men and women who are trained will be able to preach the homily of Mass on Sunday. Maybe even to introduce women deacons. Maybe even to talk about married priests. So it's a discussion. Establish diocesan prayer centres so that we're driven by our prayer, and the abuse from the Royal Commission to continue to reach out and be healing as a church, and to have a revolution of tenderness in our church instead of a church that says this is what you must do. We need to be tender, we need to be caring. And I was interviewed after one of the assembly sessions, and they said, what do you think the church of the future will be? And I said, it needs to be a hope-filled, joy-filled, compassionate, tender church, which is collaborative with shared responsibility and Christ-centeredness. So that's a little summary of hopefully where we're going in a new vision of the church. So if anyone would like to ask any questions about anything I've said or anything about Plenary Council, please feel free.
I've got a question.
Yes.
I'm Mark Neal. I'm from branch 88 in Maroochydore. We've got a branch plan, and part of that plan includes specifically looking at what we do in a whole range of areas. And the number one at the top is at the national level, how are we contributing to a variety of church-related things, including Plenary Council. But when we go to report against it, it's like, well, we haven't heard much. We want to contribute, we want to be involved. So my next question is, so what are the next steps that will involve us so that we can participate?
Okay, it's a good question. We had the listening discernment for about 18 months back in 18 and 19. So that was the everyone And I think this is part of the problem. I said that there's a lot of ignorance about the Plenary Council, and how do you share? Because it's really gone into itself in some ways, because we've had the first assembly, we'll have the second assembly, and a lot of these are working documents which is only for those who are participating, so it's very difficult at the moment. And that's why I was sort of stretching it a little bit more than what we normally would do, just talking about some of the proposals that will go forward to the Plenary Council. But that's for your ears, just to let you know that there are things happening. But there's not a lot coming out from Plenary Council at the moment until we actually have the Plenary Council. The plan is that the Plenary Council is held after the Bishops' Conference this year, and then the Bishops' Conference will meet again. The interesting thing is that of the 280 members, it's only the bishops who have a vote for everything to go to Rome. The rest are consultative, and there's a lot of lay people involved. And I was trying to work out how many lay people are actually involved, and it was to be a very, very small group, and the bishops petitioned Rome so there'd be more. And in Brisbane, we've got the Archbishop, the two bishops, myself, a couple of other vicars, and 4 lay people. So out of 11 in Brisbane, 4 of them are lay people, and then there's a couple of religious and religious leaders. But I acknowledge that there's a lot of ignorance about the Plenary Council. That's why it's good that I can talk to you and sort of share a little bit with what's going on.
Thank you.
Yes.
Daniel Totten, West with the Branch 93. As I gather from that, then the points that you've made there before are not available on the website, but they're just information that you have available for us today.
Yes.
Yeah, so, the information that's not available on the website, if we go in there to find out what points have been put to the council.
I don't think it's on the website, because I was looking at the website yesterday and today just to get some more information, and that working document is for members only. Yes. And as I say, it contains a lot of proposals, but they're not the last proposals, because once we go to plenary, the next assembly, there'll be more proposals as well. And I think that's why it's good that I can sort of let you know that some of what's being discussed is actually happening.
Damien from Caboolture Branch 90. Father Dan, we had a state conference, our last face-to-face one, a bit over, about 3 years ago, and we were given an introduction to the Plenary Council at that particular state conference, and we had a number of our delegates from parishes at that stage said, well, we know nothing about it. And the message from that meeting was, go back and ask your parish priest, because all the material has gone to all the parishes and they know about it, but they may need a bit of help to get it going. So that was where it was at that stage. I know our own parish eventually did something, and we had about 3 work groups and put forward something like that. But I guess the challenge is, how do we activate parishes to actually implement the discussion groups and get the material out there? That was the question we had back then, and I guess it still may be the question if there's some ignorance out there.
Yes, I think it's been that sort of hiatus that's happened, is that in 18 and 19 we were asked to have those listening and discernment groups in the parishes. Depended on your priest. You know, like I know a lot of parishes never did anything, and I acknowledge that, because I've recently moved into another parish in Brisbane, and the previous parish priest hasn't done anything, and people are saying, what's this Plenary Council? We haven't heard anything about it. And but it's terrible to say. It sounds a bit like a bureaucracy, doesn't it? That it's all happening, but the grassroots don't know anything about it. But I think the parish work was really the 18 and 19 that was then contributed.
Father, can I just share with you the nights in our parish? It's Wynnum initiated the response, the listening response to the call from the Plenary Council, and we were the ones that sort of collated and analysed all that and submitted it through the web. But when we sort of analysed what in fact were the main issues that had come up, we realised that 3/4 of what in fact we'd sent back into that thing were things that didn't need the Plenary Council to do anything about it. They were things that we as a parish could do something. So we went to our parish priest and said, there's these things that the parish is saying that do in fact, if we're listening to the Spirit, need to be responded to. He responded and allowed us, and we then started a parish renewal. And we've spent the last 18 months as a parish renewal breaking that down into small groups and seeing how, in fact, the people that want to be involved. We had a parish meeting, we had over 100 there, and we got 25 volunteers to lead those small groups, responding, whether it be liturgy, welcoming, reaching out to people that have been in the RCIA or baptism programs to make sure that their interaction with the church was carried on, just rather than a one event. But it was the Knights that initiated that and then supported as the parish became involved. So to answer Damien's question, I think it's up, coming back to Father Kissie's point, are we open to amazing grace and the challenge that's there for us to look in a different way to see how we can respond to the opportunities that we get?
Wonderful. Thank you.
Francis Bryce, Branch 11. It just strikes me that the process is a bit messy in terms of you've got the Plenary Council, then you've got the Pope announcing the synodal process over the top of that. And how is it proposed that, and appreciating that COVID has delayed things that would have happened in the past, how is it it's proposed to be managed that the Plenary Council continues with the synodal process overlaying it from a global level?
There is a synodal process going on and the same listening discernment where people have been invited to put into the bishops of the world what needs to be changed. In some ways it's hand in glove with the Plenary Council, and it can be the same agenda too, and I think it's a little bit the same. Not a lot of people actually did that discernment on synods, which is to go through to the bishops in Rome. And to be really honest, I don't know a lot about the synod in Rome neither, because it's a little bit like our Plenary Council. The Plenary Council is local for Australia, what's the Spirit saying to Australia, whereas the bishops' synod is what is the Spirit saying for the whole church throughout the whole of the world. And we've been given opportunities to do that, but I'm not sure how many people took up those opportunities too. But in some ways, I've heard Archbishop Coleridge say it's sort of hand in glove, because it's you've got the national church of Australia, but you also got the international world being looked at as well. Thank you.
One last question. Yeah, I'll ask a question. Andrew Vaccaro from Victoria. A question I would like to ask is, how do you discern what the Spirit is saying as opposed to what the world is saying? Because from what I've observed, now a lot of there are obviously various groups involved, various lay organisations, and various individuals, and every one of them will come with their own agenda and ideas, and it'll be their wish list, and some of these things are things that take away from our Catholicity. We've the beauty of our Catholic Church, it's got a wonderful set of traditions, a beautiful liturgy, music, history, and there are groups, within the Catholic faith, there are various groups, various charisms, various philosophies and ideas. How do we find a way? Do you feel that we're finding a way to bring all these groups together, or could there be a lot more division along the way? because that's one of the things that concerns me, is when you see some of these radical ideas are a real drift away from what our faith is. And one of the things that I've noticed is when you look at, for example, converts to the Catholic faith, many of their reasons for converting to the Catholic faith is they love what we stand for. They love that we stand for a certain ideal, that we haven't gone down the path that a lot of these Protestant churches have and have seen their numbers dwindle. Is that being looked at? Is that being addressed about what actually brings people to the Catholic faith?
I think the interesting thing is people have their own agendas often, and I think even in the discernment process, the listening discernment process in 18 and 19, there were groups who put their own agenda forward, and there's a filtering process in that. But even in the group of 280, people have their own agenda, but when you have that listening group of 8, and you listen to 8 people, and someone's got their own agenda, it drops out of the conversation, because it's 8 people who are listening. And if you're pushing your own barrow, I've learned over the years that pushing your own barrow, or trying to push with heavy-handedness, the Spirit's not in that. The Spirit listens to the group discernment. And that's what I found in the group, even in the group of 30, there were a few bishops trying to push their own barrows, but it dropped down because there was a whole group of 30 listening to the conversation, and they could discern that that's not of the Spirit. So, but we have to be faithful to our traditions, we certainly have, but we've been a changing church right from the beginning since Christ. Christ was really missionary and outgoing and healing, and he broke all the laws. He worked with unclean people. He worked with the adulterous woman, and he wanted to reach out to those people. And I think that's why that the revolution of tenderness is, we're being challenged as a church to have a revolution of tenderness. That we're not a church that's strictly legal, but it is tender and encouraging and trying to keep everybody in the fold, but trying to do that with keeping our traditions as well. Thank you.
Dan, thank you very much, and could you please join with me and thank Father. Father Dan's going to be presented this evening with a gift at the dinner, because as you know, besides coming here today to present his paper, he's now going to help us with a candle ceremony and conduct that for us.